Donkey Kong! Donkey Kong! Donkey Kong! One of Nintendo's most classic characters of all time, Donkey Kong, which is part of a series that is still going since the 1980s. So when you think of Donkey Kong, you think of two things. The first one is the classic arcade games that introduced Donkey Kong and Mario. The second, if you were born in the 90s, you would think of the franchise known as Donkey Kong Country. This franchise of platformers is really special to a lot of Nintendo fans out there. So after Nintendo decided to go from arcade to console, they used Mario from the Donkey Kong games as the main character. So while Mario is striving for various games over the years, Donkey Kong lay dormant for a really long time. But with the Sega Genesis on Nintendo's tail, they decided to bring him back. Especially considering that around this time, Aladdin released on the Sega Genesis. This made Nintendo worried because Aladdin showed impressive results, especially with animation and such. So around then, Nintendo decided to collab with a British studio named Rare. At Rare, they have these special machines called Silicon Graphics that can make them do 3D models and such. So with all this technology they had, they decided to reboot the Donkey Kong series with a brand new world, new characters, and everything. This game also started with DK's brand new design, which became a mainstay throughout the ages. But anyway, with everything out of the way, let's get started. So on a stormy night, Diddy Kong was in charge of guarding the banana horde, when suddenly this mysterious creature named the Kremlings kidnaps him and stole the bananas. The next morning, Donkey Kong immediately knows that something's up and charges right out of his house. One look in his cave realized that his entire banana horde has been stolen by the Kremlings, so it's now up to Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong to go out and save the banana horde. Now in DK Country, Donkey Kong will be traveling out through the entire island to save his banana horde, which means he's going through various areas and such. Along the way, he'll find Diddy Kong in various barrels that the Kremlings stuffed him inside. You can play as Diddy Kong easily by just switching at a dime. Interestingly though, this was originally going to be Donkey Kong Jr., but they thought that he looked too different from DK Jr., so he decided to make him its own character. And Donkey Kong Jr. has yet to be found. Now between Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, the more favorable character is easily Diddy Kong. Diddy Kong is faster and more nimble, and he controls better in the air and such. While Donkey Kong is a bit slower, feels a bit more stiff, yet he is very strong. AKA Donkey Kong can easily just take down enemies that Diddy Kong cannot. And clearly Rare noticed this because in the next game, Donkey Kong is out of the picture while being replaced by Dixie Kong. Because it makes sense, because Diddy Kong makes these levels a lot more fun to play through. Because for the levels in Donkey Kong Country, they're a bit more steep, they're a bit more curvy compared to other platformers out there. Take the first level, for example, where everything feels very bumpy because they're in the jungle. This game has a bit of a more realistic approach compared to other platformers around this time. The settings in this game is pretty much like jungle area, cave area, snow area, and factory area, with a hint of ruins area. Now throughout the game, you'll also find various Kong members throughout the game to help you around. The first one is Cranky Kong, who is the original Donkey Kong from the arcade games, growing more gruff and more bitter. He gives you various guides throughout the levels, but mostly of the time he mostly just bickers about the pre-rendered graphics and such. Stuff like this is usually Rare's trademark fourth wall break humor, where they constantly make jokes about the fourth wall and such, and they acknowledge that they're in the game, which became one of the main story elements for Donkey Kong Land, where Cranky Kong, being bitter, says that DK cannot save the banana horde on a weaker console. The next Kong we have here is Mario Kart fans' favorite character, Funky Kong. Now with this Kong, he's pretty much like the world select screen, where he helps you go through previous worlds. And he's also just a really, really cool Kong. The last Kong we have here is Candy Kong, who is pretty much the save point of the game. You pretty much just jump into a barrel and save your progress, which is very useful, especially because the level design in this game can be very, very challenging. It's not the hardest game in the world, but it can give you a good challenge sometimes. Now, Donkey Kong's family is not the only people helping him, because with various levels and such, you can find animal buddies. The first one we have here is Rambi the Rhino, who is pretty powerful, can defeat any enemy just with his face. You can also use him to unlock various secret areas to get a bunch of bananas and balloons. Now in various areas, Donkey Kong will be going underwater. Underneath here, you can find Ungar the Swordfish. Ungar can make Donkey Kong swim better, and he can enable attack people underwater. Winky the Frog can let Donkey Kong jump into very high places. And lastly, Espresso the Ostrich allows Donkey Kong to glide around the area, However, he cannot attack enemies, which is a bit of a shame. Now, there's also this animal bunny called Squawks, who appears in later games, but for him, he only appears in one level where he shines a flashlight. Now, I'm playing this on an updated version of this game because with the original game, he flashes the entire screen, which can be a bit of an eyesore a lot of times. But luckily, even with the original version, he only appears in one level, so yeah. Now, visually and aesthetically, this game surprisingly holds up really well, in my opinion. Which is honestly saying a lot, considering that when it comes to 3D rendered graphics in the 90s, they are mostly dated a lot of times. But besides some certain enemies or something, a lot of character models and everything just looks very good and aged surprisingly well. This is the first game that used pre-rendered 3D graphics from Nintendo. Now I know what some people might be saying. What is pre-rendered 3D graphics? Well, besides maybe some effects like Star Fox and Yoshi's Island, the Super Nintendo cannot do 3D graphics. So instead, they take 3D rendered images and take them into sprites. They had to painstakingly make every single image, and it's honestly pretty impressive looking back, and it's still impressive to this day. There's a certain charm with pre-rendered 3D graphics that I honestly really like. I wouldn't say this is the best looking game on the Super Nintendo. I honestly prefer stuff like Yoshi's Island because that one looks very beautiful. But this is honestly one of the most impressive looking games on the Super Nintendo, no doubt. And I think what also helped is the sound design because holy crap, this is one of the best sound designs in any Super Nintendo game yet. For every game series, there's always a main composer for every game. And for Donkey Kong, that is David Wise. Now, for the soundtrack in Donkey Kong Country, the Super Nintendo series altogether is honestly one of the best soundtracks in any Super Nintendo game yet. The soundtrack in this game is just really top-notch, and it's very atmospheric. Island Swing is Donkey Kong's main soundtrack. It's the song that you think of Donkey Kong with. Aquatic Ambience is just this really relaxing and atmospheric tone as you swim through the deep water. It is honestly just a top-notch soundtrack. And I feel like there's more to it than just the soundtrack, because the sound design altogether is just really good. I don't know how to describe the sound design in this game, but it just sounds really crunchy and satisfying. And that's why I can just describe Donkey Kong altogether. It's just really satisfying to play through. Whether you're going through the various jungles, or riding the various minecarts, or going through the various barrel cannons, it's a really good game to play through. Now, if I only have one gripe with this game, it's probably the boss fights. Because for the bosses in this game, they are way too easy in my opinion. Like for the first one, you're just jumping on this beaver multiple times and he just goes down like that. Now they do get a bit more challenging at the later end, but for the first few boss fights, they're really easy and go down a bit too quick. But honestly, that's just my only gripe with this game, because throughout this game is just top notch. But anyway, so with everything out of the way, time to wrap up this story. So as Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong travel throughout DK Island, they find themselves to the belly of the beast, Gangplank Galleon. On the ship, they find themselves with the leader of the Kremlings, King K. Rool. Now with King K. Rool, he is definitely the best boss fight in this game because he puts up a pretty good challenge. He constantly uses his crown and uses a bunch of cannonballs in the air to attack Donkey Kong. But after a few hits on the head, King K. Rool was able to go down with ease. They spelled credits with a K. Wait a minute. Oh, no, you go down, you little. And that concludes Donkey Kong Country 1. And overall, I think it holds up really well. The graphics and the sound in this game holds up surprisingly really well. And the level design and gameplay is just really fun and very addicting. You can replay this game a lot, and it's very enjoyable throughout. And the best part is that this game pretty much solidified Rare's and Nintendo's relationship at the time, and they were able to pull out very good games throughout the years. Especially with Donkey Kong Country 2, which is honestly their best work, and it's the next video after this. But before we go, why don't we look at the various ports of this game throughout the years? Okay. So in the 2000s when Microsoft bought Rare, they were unable to make games for Nintendo consoles, but they didn't say anything about their handheld devices. So in the early 2000s, they were able to port their Donkey Kong Country games to the GBA. With this version, they include new stuff like an opening cutscene, for example, to tell the story. The menu has a bit of a sleeker redesign to it. There's brand new collectibles you can find throughout the game. And there's quality of life insurance like a brand new save feature. And as for Candy Con, well, she's pretty much now into this little minigame where you do this little Dance Dance Revolution like game. Now there's a lot of great things about this port, but there's also a big downside with this port, which is the visuals. This is a bit of a trapping for most GBA titles, but since it's on a very dark screen, they had to brighten things up significantly. So when you look side by side, the GBA version looks very, very bright. But not only that, but the sound design in this game also took a bit of a hit, because instead of being a bit more realistic, it sounds a bit more cartoonish. But I'll be completely honest, despite the hurdle, I really think this is a really good version of Donkey Kong Country. The graphics and sound might have taken a hit, but I think we've gotten more than we lost in this game. So yeah, I recommend trying it out, although the SNES version is probably the best version, mostly because it gives you a bit of an experience. And that's not the only version of Donkey Kong Country, because there's also the Game Boy Color version. Do I really need to say anything else about this version? It's honestly really impressive that they were able to get this game running on the Game Boy Color, but between the two portable versions, it's obviously to get the GBA version. Honestly, it's kind of worth to try this version out just to see how well they were able to port it, but other than that, yeah, I really don't recommend this version. Weirdly though, they took a screenshot of Donkey Kong 64 for the main menu of this game. Okay. So for the next video, we're gonna go to the sequel, Donkey Kong Country 2. I am very excited because this is honestly my favorite Rare game of all time. But that'll do for today, so thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye-bye!